Ben Shapiro sucks. Okay? Are we ready?
Our education system is just in tatters. Okay, let's just be real about this. Our public education system sucks. It is not good. The latest indicator that our public education system sucks is on Tuesday night. The San Francisco School Board voted to accept the recommendations of a renaming committee. This is according to Emily Zanotti at Daily Wire. They voted to officially rename 44 public schools in San Francisco, bearing the names of controversial historical figures. These figures include Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Herbert Hoover, Paul Revere, Thomas Edison, and Senator Dianne Feinstein, who was once the mayor of San Francisco. San Francisco commissioned the renaming committee in October of 2019. They announced they were putting the committee's name change recommendations to a vote in December, and they kept claiming, oh, it's just a recommendation. We're not going to do anything. Well, then they did it. So what is the big problem with Feinstein? So according to a 1984 copy of Workers' Vanguard, quote unquote, Dixie Feinstein raised a Confederate flag at San Francisco Civic Center while she was mayor of the city and later replaced the flag after it was pulled down by protesters. But it turns out that that was part of a historical flags display. And it wasn't clear that Feinstein had anything to do with it. It doesn't matter. Her name comes off the high schools. Abraham Lincoln ran afoul of the committee because, quote, he did not demonstrate that Black lives mattered to him. That's a hot take there, San Francisco.
Dianne Feinstein definitely did the Confederate flag. So, I'd be pretty cool with not naming anything after her. Also, what has she ever accomplished? I don't know what the problem is with renaming Dianne Feinstein, chat. I'm going to be honest with you.
Abraham Lincoln, the man who was shot to death in a theater after ending the Civil War and issuing the Emancipation Proclamation. He didn't.
Actually, he passed the 13th Amendment, Ben Shapiro, which abolished chattel slavery unless you were in prison. So, Emancipation Proclamation was a temporary war measure. The 13th Amendment was the amendment that banned slavery. You just went to Harvard Law School, so you probably didn't know that.
He didn't believe that Black Lives Matter. Solid take there, San Francisco. Really well done. Really, what they should have just gone with is that he was a homophobe. And here's the thing. You could use that for like everyone, including Barack Obama, up to like 2011. It's good. We should just rename all of the schools, every single school, in favor. We need to find the wokest person, and that person all the schools will be named after. I'm talking about we need like a 1/4.
Mike from PA. Chat. Mike from PA. It's easy. We'll name all the schools after me. Then they can never be canceled because I can't be. And finally, everyone will have good opinions.
1/4 Black, 1/4 Native American, 1/4 South American, 1/4 Chinese, little person, transgender, pansexual. That's what we need. We'll find that person, and that person we will name all of the high schools after. We don't know who that is yet, but could be you. It could be your lucky day if you are that person. If I just described you, please send your application in to the San Francisco School Board. According to the San Francisco Chronicle, many San Francisco parents, as well as Mayor London Breed, argued the effort was ill-timed given the pandemic. Oh yeah, it's just the bad timing. That's the problem. By the way, the move is going to cost San Francisco's school district millions of bucks because they actually have to go through and rename all of this. But what does money matter in schooling after all? I mean, one thing that we definitely know is that when it comes to schooling, it's the teachers' unions who rule the roost. Over in Chicago, they've got disaster on the mind. Chicago Public Schools has now directed parents to keep their students home again on Thursday because the Chicago's teacher union is moving closer to a strike. By the way, that's illegal, as far as I'm aware. CPS said in an email to parents on Wednesday evening, quote, Chicago Teachers Union leadership continues to direct their members who support pre-K and...
Hold on. I'm looking at the actual spreadsheet. Of all the names, Abraham Lincoln is not seen as much of a hero at all among Native American Indian nations and Native peoples of the United States, as the majority of his policies proved to be detrimental to them. For instance, the Homestead Act, the Pacific Railway Act of 1862 helped precipitate the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, which led to the significant loss of land and natural resources, as well as the loss of lifestyle and culture for many indigenous peoples. In addition, rampant corruption in the Indian Office, the precursor to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, continued unabated throughout Lincoln's term and well beyond. In many cases, government-appointed Indian agents outright stole resources that were supposed to go to the tribes. In other cases, Lincoln's administration simply continued to implement discriminatory and damaging policies like placing Indians on reservation. Beginning in 1863, the Lincoln administration oversaw the removal of the Din Nation, Navajo, from the New Mexico territory, forcing the Din to march the long walk of 450 miles to Bosique Redondo, a brutal journey. Eventually, more than 2,000 died before the treaty was signed. Also responsible for the Dakota 38+2, the largest mass hanging in history. So there you go. That's their justification. Notes was Lincoln was not responsible for executing the Dakota 38. The first governor of New Mexico was responsible. Or sorry, Minnesota. Governor condemned 300 plus people to be executed. Lincoln intervened and pardoned and saved 265. If Lincoln had not acted, 300 people would have died and blame would fall on the first governor. This is the official spreadsheet. So there you go. That's the spreadsheet. They want to rename things. You know, honestly, this is kind of like weak shit. Who cares? My big response to this is who cares?
Cluster programs to remain at home. Therefore, we must ask parents to continue keeping your children home as we are unable to guarantee adequate staffing levels to cover in-person learning. The district will continue with remote learning tomorrow on January 28th. So, good news, they're just going to keep these teachers out forever. The teachers have decided that they don't want to work anymore. And yes, that makes you selfish. It does. If you decide that you...
Oh. He's why is he pivoting to Chicago? Can we go back?
Francisco School Board. According to the San Francisco Chronicle, many San Francisco parents, as well as Mayor London Breed, argued the effort was ill-timed given the pandemic. Oh, yeah, it's just the bad timing. That's the problem. By the way, the move is going to cost San Francisco's school district millions of bucks because they actually have to go through and rename all of this. But what does money matter in schooling, after all? I mean, one thing that we definitely know is that when it comes to schooling, it's the teachers' unions who rule the roost. Over in Chicago, they've got disaster on that.
What? Okay, so San Francisco wants to rename some schools because out of sensitivity for various, they want to teach people about the real history of American figures. And you know what? Like, go ahead. I'm fine with that. If after learning the reality of American history, people don't want to associate with historical figures, that's fine. I tend to think it's better for you to look and see that you shouldn't idealize any historical figure. Now he's just bitching about Chicago unions. Okay, let's go on.
On the mind, Chicago Public Schools has now directed parents to keep their students home again on Thursday because the Chicago's teacher union is moving closer to a strike. By the way, that's illegal, as far as I'm aware.
No, it's not. Ben Shapiro went to Harvard Law School, and he's not aware that a recognized formal union can strike. They absolutely can strike in protest of working conditions. Has he ever read a single thing about the labor law? Harvard, are you embarrassed?
CPS said in an email to parents on Wednesday evening, quote, Chicago Teachers Union leadership continues to direct their members who support pre-K and cluster programs to remain at home. Therefore, we must ask parents to continue keeping your children home as we are unable to guarantee adequate staffing levels to cover in-person learning. The district will continue with remote learning tomorrow on January 28th. So, good news, they're just going to keep these teachers out forever. The teachers have decided that they don't want to work anymore. And yes.
Okay, that's not it. There's what's known as COVID-19 pandemic taking place. The COVID-19 pandemic is ravaging the country. Well over. As of this video, let's go take a look at Bing COVID tracker. As of right now, Ben Shapiro, we've lost 443,000 people, including 21,000 people in Illinois, with over 1 million cases of infection. So when the teachers say, hey, many of them who are elderly, many of them who have health conditions say, we don't want to return to the classroom in person while there's a raging global pandemic going on. And by the way, under the National Labor Relations Act, Ben, there is a legally protected right for employees to strike to gain better wages or to fight for better working conditions. And, you know, not having sufficient protection from a pandemic would be a working condition, a dangerous one at that. And so a union could absolutely strike and be protected. That would not be illegal. You dumb fuck.
That makes you selfish. It does. If you decide that you want to take public pay and not work, and you are 20 years old and at very little risk of COVID, and it turns out that you're teaching kindergartners who aren't transmitting.
Okay, notice how he just had to pile 3 or 4 bullshit stipulations. What's the average age of a teacher in Chicago? I'm looking at a government statistics right now, and it says the average age of a teacher is 42.7. So that means people well into their middle age, which means a large segment of them are older than that. They're not 20. They're not teaching kindergarten. It's the entire thing, dummy dumb. Some states don't allow teachers to strike, Master. That's a state-by-state thing. Federally, it's not illegal.
It. That makes you a bad person. It does. Hate to break it to you, and just because you're a teacher, if you're not teaching, you're no longer a teacher. If you're not doing the job of teaching, I cannot call you a teacher at this point.
They're doing the job of teaching. They're doing distance learning. What's really funny about all this shit about this is I spent years arguing against Republican reptiles like Ben Shapiro about distance learning and cyber charter schools and how cyber charter schools were a scam and they were terrible for children and that children didn't learn very well in distance learning settings. And these conservatives were like, we need to have more cyber charter schools. Yeah, they're great. They're great. They're great. Now, because of a global pandemic, we recognize that we can't have in-person learning, so we must try national distance learning. We're finding out it's a fucking disaster. Ben Shapiro is screeching about how it's bad all of a sudden. We gotta force the kids back to school in the middle of a pandemic. And yes, you're a vile murderer, Ben Shapiro. Everyone who supports you, and you in particular, I'm pointing you, you're a vile murdering scumbag. In other countries, they don't have COVID. If any Ben Shapiro fan actually manages to watch this segment at any point, I want to show you countries that actually ran their shit correctly. Look at New Zealand right here. Look at New Zealand. Look at New Zealand. 72 active cases. They've lost 25 deaths. Look at Australia. They've lost 900 people in Australia. Look at their curve. See that spike? They get into a lockdown and shove it down to 0. See the second spike? Lockdown. Shoved back down to 0. That's how you handle the pandemic. See how they crushed the curve? You want to see other places? Vietnam. 35 fatal cases, 326 active ones. They've had 1,800. There's 100 million people in Vietnam. 100 million people in Vietnam! 35 deaths! Just like they beat our boys on the battlefield, they beat COVID. Just like they dashed and snatched the flower of American youth, they beat Corona. Just like Charlie got behind the lines and crushed the entire spirit of a generation. The boomer generation was defeated by the Vietnamese. They also defeated COVID. The American empire was humiliated in Vietnam. You know who else was humiliated in Vietnam? COVID-19. Then we go over to America. We go over to America, and we've lost 443,000 people. Look at this. Does it look like we're controlling this disease? So I showed you Western countries, Australia and New Zealand, and I showed you commie countries. And whether they were a Western country or a commie country, they could figure it the fuck out. So it's assholes and murderers like Ben Shapiro that are killing people. And lying to you when the Teachers Union of Chicago is one of the few organizations in the country trying to stop this pandemic, You have scumbags like this who lie about what the law is because they're too lazy, or even worse, and what I think is going on here, an active liar.
I can just call you a leech off the public taxpayer dollar. Okay, unless you are somebody who is super.
As opposed to Ben Shapiro. Ben Shapiro really providing value, chat. Really providing a lot of value. Really educating his audience. Doing a lot to make sure all of you are educated.
Supremely vulnerable to COVID. Again, if you're a young dance teacher who is not going in.
So what Ben Shapiro does here, this is why he's a liar. And this is a feature of conservative arguments in general. And once you notice it, you'll start to see it pop up everywhere. They name some fringe edge case and then try to generalize it. Well, why can't we have a common sense immigration policy? Did you hear about that person that was murdered by an illegal immigrant? Well, I mean, actually, if you look at the evidence, recent immigrants, including undocumented people, have a lower crime rate than native-born Americans. But any crime committed by an immigrant shouldn't happen because they're here illegally. Well, actually, they would be here legally if we had common sense immigration controls, and things would probably be safer because people would have documentation, they would pay taxes, we would be able to track their movement, we would understand where they were immigrating to, their activities. You know, they would come out of the shadows, and a lot more crime would probably be solved if we did it that way. You know, for example, when Cubans fled Cuba, when white conservative Cubans fled Cuba after the revolution, they were granted immediate asylum and then a green card for permanent status after 1 year in the country. And yet Florida didn't fall apart. But I guess it was okay as long as they're white Cubans, right? And same thing here. Well, you think, you know, most 22-year-old teachers who are really healthy wouldn't be killed by COVID, so therefore we should open the schools. If you're convinced by that argument, you've got a baby brain.
To dance away the hours with first graders because of COVID, you're just lying.
Also, like, can we just say, I don't know, I can't believe I have to explain this after a year of a pandemic. But the way diseases spread is they don't kill everyone instantly as soon as you get them. You catch them, and then you become an asymptomatic carrier, and you transmit it to other people. So that dance teacher, maybe she wouldn't die, and maybe the 6-year-old wouldn't die. Although there's a very disgusting disease that hurts children called multi-organ inflammatory syndrome. I'll show you that clip later, just so you understand what Ben Shapiro wants children to experience. But then those children go and they go into the bubble with their parents and their grandparents at home, and they die. And the disease starts spreading more and keeps going around and through community spread. And then you have mutations, and then it keeps growing, and then it keeps spreading around. So it's not just young people and children that get it. They spread it to the old people inside their bubble. Which is why congregating them indoors is dangerous.
It is not about your risk. It is about the fact that you prefer to stay home and watch old episodes on HGTV. That's all that's going on right now. It's absurd, and it has nothing to do with the good of students, obviously. It is anti-science, naturally. The Biden administration is doing nothing about it, nor are they even sounding off about it. And you're going to start to see a parents' uprising here. If Democrats don't create some gap between them and these god-awful teachers' unions, parents are going to start saying, you know what, I'm not going to vote for the party that's in hock to these folks. Here, for example, is a frustrated Virginia parent saying that school board cowards who are not reopening our schools, they're hiding behind children, but they're not doing this for the kids. They're doing this for themselves.
You're a bunch of cowards hiding behind our children as an excuse for keeping schools closed. You think you're some sort of martyrs because of the decisions you're making when the statistics do not lie that the vast majority of the population is not at risk from this virus. The garbage workers who pick up my freaking trash risk their lives every day more than anyone in this school system.
Okay. First of all, the garbage workers are absolutely heroes, without a doubt. But they're outside, they're socially distanced, and they're wearing PPE. Whereas teachers in a school can't be socially distanced because there's not enough physical space. Children have much less compliance with things like mask wearing than adults, although children brain and conservative brain, I'm not so sure about that. And being inside is when you have that risk. And by the way, children also get severe COVID. They may not die, but they get some pretty disgusting long-term effects.
Thank you for joining us.
And I want to show you some of those effects and how dangerous and damaging COVID can be, even to children.
We're going to begin with a growing number of cases of that alarming and deadly illness attacking children that's been linked to coronavirus. Tonight, more than 300 cases have been reported in the U.S. in 27 states and Washington,
This was
D.C.
back when we only had 74,000. There's only 94,000 deaths. So this was a while ago, chat. But I just wanted to show you the illness. We're now well over 440,000 deaths. We're headed towards 1 million.
Doctors say they are now seeing the disease called multi-system inflammatory syndrome in teens and young adults. New York's governor says he's now urging parents not to send their children to day camps until more is known about the disease. And that comes as there are new projections that there will be a second wave of infections from COVID-19 as more states reopen, especially in the South. In Alabama's capital, Montgomery, the situation is already dire. The mayor there says hospitals in his city are almost out of ICU beds. And as we come on the air, there are more than 1.5 million confirmed cases of COVID-19 nationwide. More than 94,000 people have been killed by the virus in the U.S. And tonight, after months of disinfecting our groceries, door handles, and nearly everything else we touch, the CDC now says it does not believe the virus spreads easily from surfaces to people, though it says we are still just learning about how it is transmitted. Well, there's a lot of news to get to tonight, and we have a team of correspondents covering it all. CBS's Chip Reed is going to lead us off tonight.
So what I want to show you is what can happen to... So the thing about COVID isn't just like you get COVID and then you're fine, or you die. There's a range of damage. People who die are for who the damage accumulates at such a degree that it kills you. I'm sorry to take so much time for a 5-minute fucking video, but it's so jam-packed full of misinformation, I've got to do it.
Tonight, outside Children's National. Chip?
Well, Nora, there are now 23 children here at Children's Hospital in Washington who have been diagnosed with this COVID-related disease. In New York, there are at least 157 cases being investigated, and 3 children in New York have died.
This inflammatory syndrome is more frightening than COVID respiratory illness in some ways because it inflames the heart.
New York Governor Andrew Cuomo today urged parents not to send their children to summer camp until it becomes clear just how widespread the disease is.
The more we look, the more we find it.
At Children's National Hospital in Washington, the number of children with the illness has grown from 5 to 23 in just 8 days. They range in age from 3 to 17. Dr. Roberta DiBiase is the hospital's chief of pediatric infectious diseases.
What do parents need to know? How can they, what should they be on the lookout for?
The most overarching common theme amongst all the patients is fever, and significant fever. So not low-grade fever, but fever that is, 102 or higher and persistent.
And she says there's a wide spectrum of additional possible symptoms.
And those children, for instance, can have problems with their heart function, their kidney function, their liver function.
Those more severe effects, though, she says, are rare.
The fact that a rare complication can lead to significant disease just reiterates that we shouldn't take this disease lightly.
There are also reports that some people in their 20s have been diagnosed with this so-called children's syndrome, with several in the New York City area. In Baltimore this weekend, Dariana Dyson died from the illness. She would have turned 16 next month and was looking forward to celebrating at the beach with her family. Chip Reed, CBS News, Washington.
But we got to make sure that line go up, chat. We got to make sure that line goes up.
Hey, fact check true. Fact check true. Facts don't care about your feelings, and it's a fact that the Ben Shapiro Show is the largest conservative podcast in the nation. Be sure to hit the subscribe button to stay up to date on all of our content.
My facts destroy your feelings, Ben. And you are a weaselly little liar, dude. A weaselly little liar. Typical Republican, by the way. Notice that he started the video talking about San Francisco renaming their schools. Who cares? They get to do what the fuck they want to name their schools. If they decide they don't want to name it to former slavers, that's their decision. They can do that. And he rotates it to demonizing the Chicago school teachers instead of his own incompetent dipshit former president who's killed hundreds of thousands of people and hundreds of thousands more are going to die. That's the Republican Party. What a piece of shit. If you want more leftists on this platform and other platforms that actually go into deep dives about issues like finance and electoral politics, you're never gonna find a better stream than this one. Here's some things you can do. I'm posted YouTube content constantly. We had another Jimmy Dore video. We had a not safe for stream debate with conservatives where Vosh and I and Denims debated with a bunch of conservatives about voter fraud. You have the dumbass takes of uniting with fascists. Get in there. Get in there.